The words hit her like a thunderclap. Her hand trembled as she reached for her chest, as if the very idea of what I was saying was too much to bear. She took a step back, as if physically recoiling from the truth. For a long moment it felt like the world stopped turning. My mother's face was a mask of disbelief and horror, her eyes wide and unblinking. She looked at me, her daughter, the child she had raised, and then back at Papa, who stood by, his face expressionless. You're lying," she whispered, her voice so faint that I almost didn't hear it. I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. "No, Mama, I swear to you I'm not. He's been doing things to me. Please, don't you see?" The words hit her like a slap to the face. She staggered backward, her hand falling to her mouth as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Cynthia," she whispered, more to herself than to me. This isn't possible." My stomach churned, my heart breaking. I had never seen my mother look so fragile, so lost. It was like the world she had built for us was crumbling around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Papa stepped forward again, his face hardening. "Enough of this nonsense, Cynthia," he snapped. "You'll regret this. You have no idea what you're saying." But Mama wasn't looking at him anymore. Her gaze was fixed on me, and in her eyes I saw something I hadn't seen before. Doubt. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough for me to feel a flicker of hope. "Mama," I said softly, trying to calm the storm inside me. "Please, believe me. I'm your daughter. I would never lie about something like this." There was a long pause, a long stretch of silence where time seemed to slow down. Mama's hands shook as she touched her face, her eyes darting to Papa and then back to me. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. "I don't know what to believe." My heart shattered in that moment. My mother, the woman who had always been my protector, my safe haven, was questioning me. But she wasn't the only one. Papa took a step toward her, his voice soft and smooth. "This isn't the way to handle this, Mama. You've always trusted me. Don't let her ruin that." But Mama wasn't looking at Papa anymore. Her gaze was locked onto me, her expression softening just slightly, though fear and disbelief still clouded her features. "I don't know what's going on," she said, her voice breaking, "but I need time to think." Papa was silent for a moment, and I thought, just for a second, that maybe, just maybe, I had a chance. But that glimmer of hope was crushed when he spoke again. "Time? What time?" His voice was rising, his anger bubbling to the surface. "She's trying to destroy us, destroy everything we've built." Mama's face crumpled as she turned away, retreating into the corner. "I don't know what to believe," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what's true anymore." In that moment, I realized that nothing would ever be the same. I had told the truth, and yet my world was shattering before my eyes. I had no idea what would happen next. I didn't know if Mama would believe me. But I knew one thing for sure. I could never go back to the way things were. The fight for my truth had only just begun. The days that followed were filled with constant worry. I couldn't keep anything down. Water, food, it all came back up, leaving me weak and trembling. My body felt out of control, as though it was betraying me in every way. Mama noticed how pale I had become. I didn't want to tell her what was happening inside me, but I could see the worry in her eyes every time she looked at me. "Cynthia," she said one evening, her voice tight with concern. "You're looking sick. You've been throwing up for days and you're losing weight. I'm taking you to the hospital tomorrow." I wanted to protest, to tell her I was fine, but how could I? I wasn't fine. Every day felt like a battle, and I couldn't win. The next morning, she helped me get dressed and took me to the small clinic in the village. The ride there was silent. I felt like I was sinking deeper into myself with every mile. When we arrived, I could hardly stand, and the nurse had to help me onto the examination table. "Let's run a few tests," the doctor said after Mama explained what was happening. He took a blood sample and asked a few questions, though I could hardly answer through the dizziness. A few minutes later, the doctor returned, holding a clipboard in his hands. I could see the expression on his face, and my heart dropped into my stomach. "Mrs. Uche," the doctor began, his voice professional but sympathetic. "I'm afraid your daughter is pregnant." I felt as though the world had stopped. I wanted to cry, to scream, but I couldn't find the words. Mama looked at the doctor for a moment, her face unreadable. Then her gaze fell on me. and I saw it, a mix of disbelief, shock, and something else I couldn't quite place. "Pregnant?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She turned to me. "Is this true, Cynthia?" I nodded, my throat tight with tears I couldn't shed. Mama's hands shook as she reached for my arm. "How? When?" she asked, her voice cracking. I couldn't tell her. I wanted to, desperately, but the words wouldn't come. There was too much shame, too much fear. The doctor left us alone for a while, and Mama sat there staring at me in silence. Her face was pale, her expression a mix of confusion and anger. "How long have you known?" she finally asked, her voice stern. I didn't answer. How could I explain something so terrible? Something that had already shattered the little bit of innocence I had left. She pulled me into her arms, but there was no comfort in it. Not for me, not for her. I could feel her trembling, as though she too was falling apart. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you say something?" But I had tried. I had told her, again and again, and every time she had dismissed it, believing it was just my imagination, my childish misunderstanding. Now the truth was undeniable. I didn't love him at first. How could I? Every time I looked at him, I saw my father's face. His eyes, his nose, everything about him reminded me of what happened to me. I was only 11. I didn't know how to take care of a baby. Mama took over. She held him when he cried. She fed him, bathed him, and whispered prayers over him at night. "God, please don't let him turn out like his father." Sometimes I wondered if she hated him too, or if she only hated herself for not believing me sooner. As the boy grew older, he called Mama Mama and me Sister Cynthia. He didn't know the truth. He didn't know he was my son. How could he? Nobody talked about it. It was a secret the family buried like a dead body. People in the village whispered when they saw us. They called me names. Spoiled girl, cursed child, bad omen. Some wouldn't let their children play with me. But I didn't care. I stopped caring about anything. My father went to prison for what he did. I thought I would never hear from him again. But one day, Mama brought me a letter. "It's from your father," she said, her face hard. I didn't want to open it, but I did. The handwriting was shaky, almost like he was afraid to write the words. "Dear Cynthia, I'm sorry. I don't know why I did what I did. I hope one day you can forgive me. Take care of yourself. Your father." I tore the letter into tiny pieces. Forgive him? How could I forgive him when he had destroyed me? Mama brought me more letters over the years. I never read them. I would burn them in the fire, watching the paper curl and turn to ash. I stopped going to school. There was no point anymore. The other kids stared at me like I was a ghost. One day, my teacher came to the house. "Cynthia should come back to school," she told Mama. "She deserves an education." But Mama shook her head. "She has to take care of the boy." I hated the boy. I hated his cries at night and the way he followed me around during the day. "Sister Cynthia! Sister Cynthia!" he would call, tugging at my dress. One day I yelled at him, "Stop calling me that!" He looked up at me, confused. "But you're my sister." I turned away, my chest burning with anger and shame. He didn't know the truth, and I couldn't tell him. When I turned 15, Mama sat me down in the small, cramped kitchen. Her face looked older, like she had aged 100 years in the last 4. "Cynthia," she said, her voice soft. "I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I should have believed you," she continued. "I was blind. I didn't want to see what was right in front of me." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "What he did to you. I failed you as a mother. Can you ever forgive me?" I wanted to yell at her. I wanted to tell her it was too late, that her apologies wouldn't change what happened. But instead, I just sat there staring at the ground. Finally, I said, "It doesn't matter anymore," because it didn't. Nothing could bring back the years I had lost. Nothing could fix me. The boy, my son, my brother, was 5 years old when he found out the truth. I don't know who told him. Maybe one of the neighbors. Maybe one of the kids at school. He came home crying. "Mama!" he shouted, running to Mama. "Is it true? Is Sister Cynthia my mother?" I froze. My hands shook as I washed the dishes, pretending not to hear. Mama knelt beside him. "Who told you that?" "Is it true?" he asked again, tears streaming down his face. Mama didn't answer. The boy turned to me, his small face twisted with confusion and hurt. "Are you my mother?" I couldn't look at him. "Go to your room," I said quietly. He didn't move. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Go to your room," I screamed, slamming the plate I was holding onto the ground. It shattered into pieces. He ran away, crying. That night, I sat on my bed and cried too. I cried for the little girl I used to be. I cried for the boy who didn't deserve any of this. I cried for the life I would never have. Years passed. The boy grew older, and so did I. He stopped calling me Sister Cynthia. Now, he called me nothing at all. We lived in the same house, but we were strangers. Mama tried to make things right. She would hold my hands and say, "Cynthia, you're strong. You can still have a good life." But I didn't believe her. I carried my father's sin like a weight on my shoulders. I couldn't escape it, no matter how hard I tried. One day, I saw the boy sitting alone in the yard, staring at the sky. He was 13 now, tall and thin like my father used to be. I walked over and sat beside him. For a long time, we didn't say anything. Then he looked at me and said, "I don't hate you." I blinked, surprised. "It's not your fault," he said. "I know that now." Tears filled my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He nodded. "Me too." I wish I could tell you that everything got better after that. But life doesn't work that way. The scars are still there, buried deep inside me. Some nights, I still wake up shaking, remembering my father's voice. This will be our little secret. But I'm learning to live with it. I'm learning to forgive myself, even if I can't forgive him. And the boy, my son, my brother, he's growing into a good man. He tells me he wants to be a doctor someday. "I want to help people like us," he says. Maybe he will. Maybe one day the weight of what happened will finally lift. But until then, I keep moving forward, one day at a time, because I survived. And that's enough.